Hey, happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome back to the I-5 Corridors Traffic Report. Tyson Alger here, joined by Shane Hoffman. It's been a few days since we actually braved the I-5 corridor in the traffic.
I did, yeah. You did.
Although, I will say, that was probably the least amount of traffic I have ever encountered on the actual I-5 corridor.
You played it perfectly. You were driving, so I won't take any credit for it. But we got in and out as soon as we could, basically.
I know you weren't initially happy when you got that text on, I think maybe it was Thursday, where I was like, hey, maybe we should leave at 6.
Right.
And you were like, because you covered football, high school football Friday night,
That's right. I didn't think I got to bed that night until like 1 a.m. So it was I was exhausted that day, as you saw.
And so we ended up, I think we met at like 7:15, like north of Vancouver. So I left my house at 6:30, a little bit of splitting the difference, but yeah, it worked out.
It did.
It worked out better than Dan Lanning's fourth. No, we're not going to go there. How are you doing, man?
Good. I feel like I'm still catching up on sleep. I was falling asleep on the car ride back, as you saw, and I was trying to fight it all day.
Well, actually, you were falling asleep on the car ride up there, on the car ride back. I don't think actually during the game, because that was pretty
dialed. As dialed as I could have been.
Yeah. So we're gonna dive into the football game. I know it's Thursday, and that's probably what people. Actually, screw it. It was the best game we've been to in a long time. Yeah. We're gonna dive into it. It's just the Cougars this week. What could happen? What could happen?
Just a back against the wall game for the Cougars, a caged animal game.
Yeah, absolutely. What'd you do this week?
Worked. I wish I could say I did something more fun than that, but just grinded. Tried to avoid the discourse as much as I could, but that was kind of inevitable and unavoidable to a certain extent.
Are you covering another high school game this week?
Yeah.
Because this might be the nicest fall weather that I've seen. And
yeah.
There's something about like sunny days in the fall here where I don't know if it's because the sun's at like a slightly different angle, but God, it just really beams.
It's nice. Yeah, I was out in the yard for a bit today, procrastinating, but I'll be out at Mountainside, which I've never been to. It's also a very new high school.
That's Keenan Lowe's school, isn't it?
It is, and he is playing his alma mater, Jesuit.
Oh, he's actually playing. He got more. He got more eligibility. Yeah.
And then a lot of kind of connections there. Ifo Ekprealomo is on the Jesuit staff as a DB's coach, so that should be a cool one.
You asked me a few months ago what I thought was one of my better stories that I've written. Yeah. And it was probably my Ifo one that I did before the Rose Bowl in 2019. I look forward to your coverage from that. Just Keenan and Ifo were two of the more interesting people that I think that I've met, like in that atmosphere of college athletes, and obviously Keenan's route through becoming a freaking hero after going the NFL route. He was an assistant and a coach with Chip Kelly's staffs for many years, and then Ifo, who blew out his leg at Rose Bowl practice and has seen what used to be a bona fide NFL career turn into him being like a pretty well-respected coach amongst this area.
Should be cool, and it's kind of, I think it'll give me an excuse to write more big picture, which is sometimes I try to do with high school, but it's, a lot of people are just looking for stats and names of their kids. And
because like it's, I found this when I was a high school reporter too. It's like you don't want to come out and do like blast a team for like a winning, like a losing streak or a bad game like that. I even struggle with this at the college level to some extent. Like I don't feel bad for criticizing like a coach who's making $8 or $9 million, but when the Oregonian had. There used to be like 20 of us high school sports reporters around, and like we were covering it way too professionally for what it was like breaking news updates, like live, I don't know. It was just it felt like it was blowing things up a little bit too much.
It probably continued in that direction since you left. I mean, you look at, there's some sites now that only cover high school sports and recruiting and transfers
so it's always been, I love high school sports reporting, and I think there's so many cool stories to tell there, but it's also we're getting into uneasy territory, I think, too, especially when we're getting into an era where athletes are going to be getting paid at that level as well.
Or already are.
Yeah.
Saturday was pretty cool.
Was that had to have been the best game you've been to, right?
Ohio State's right there.
Yeah, I was trying to put myself in my headspace of that Ohio State game, and I think I might agree with you from the stance of I mean, that Ohio State game was kind of a bit of holy shit, Oregon did this. And
Right.
I think that played a little bit into to that for me anyways.
It didn't maybe have the same feel at kick because that was Oregon was not expected to win, and then it came out before kick that KT and Flo were out.
Right.
And then it's like, and at that point we thought those players were all that mattered to that defense.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's like, oh god, they have no chance now, especially against that passing attack, and they pulled it off, and it was improbable from just a pure competition level and parity of two really good teams. I think Seattle surpassed that.
I think what was cool about the Seattle thing is it was 2 weeks of hype because of the bye week. I mean, there was more hype than that too. Capel and I did our home and home after the first week of Pac-12 play, where we're like, these unbeatens are headed for each other, and they got to each other unbeaten. Seattle was just there was just energy in that city that day too. We drove up there. We because I got our credentials in late, we had to take the light rail from the Northgate Mall. And
kind of glad we did.
No, that was so cool. Like being on the train there, and like everyone on the train was Huskies gear. There's maybe like one or two Duck hats.
Right. We looked out a place just that we didn't have any gear on.
Yeah.
Like we had backpacks. I don't know what people thought we were doing. For not journalists. Probably.
Yeah. And so from like the very start of that day to the quality of the game to it coming down to the final play, just 10 out of 10. Just loved that day. Like those are like the fun days. And shit, what time did we get home? I think
11:30.
Actually, it was
you got home a little after me, yeah.
Yeah, because the I-5 bridge closed at 11 p.m. and I hit it at 11:02. So that was a nice reroute around town too.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the game itself, and there was so much hype for the teams, but also their offenses and their quarterbacks, and saying, okay, this might be a shootout. Whoever gets the ball last. And I think you look at the game last year, and maybe you see that, and people thought it would be like that this year. But games between those two kind of level of opponents rarely play out that way. It's usually one team is extremely more prepared, and it ends up being a one-side game, or it's just clunky. And there was moments early, but it really lived up to it. And it got to the point where, I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this is probably the best game I've covered.
Do you think higher or lower about Oregon coming out of that game? Because I think higher of Oregon.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's actually, when I first started thinking that, I was like, oh, this might be, not a hot take, but I don't know if everyone's going to be thinking that. And now it seems like almost everybody is. Even, it seems like there's more mutual respect between the fan bases this week than several years.
No, I agree with you there. I don't want to have to say this, but I'm going to do anyways. The one takeaway I did coming from that, though, is I do think Michael Penix is a substantially better quarterback than Bo Nix.
Yeah, and I don't really...
I don't think that's like a hot take, but like seeing them... and they're different in the ways that they're effective. Like Bo is used in the running game where Penix isn't.
Right.
But just the calmness under pressure that Penix showed out there, it was noticeably different than Nix. And Nix played a great game, and he led that final drive that was nearly good enough to put Oregon in position to keep the game going. Like, it's just having talked about those two ad nauseum leading into that game. Michael Penix is a freaking dude.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that was the second time I've gotten to see him, but I didn't get to go. I was too busy trying to hit a deadline last year's game, so I didn't go down to the field like you did. So I've seen plenty of them, but seeing it, down on the field for that last drive, which was like over in a heartbeat, I couldn't even focus on what was happening. That the 2-play kind of game-sealing drive, the touchdown to Odunze, he was battling through cramps. Your buddy Capel did a lot of reporting on that this week. He's a destroyer. He's so scary out there when you're on the. Not that I'm out there playing DB, right?
Right.
It just there's an inevitability with him and just those receivers, and it was really cool to see it in person.
Being on the sideline towards the end of a game like that gives me so much more of an appreciation for the chaos in which coaches have to navigate.
Oh, yeah.
You can't see shit on the sidelines.
There's no depth perception where the markers are.
There's no depth perception. There's no... it's just chaos. And so to go back a week, to go to like that Mario Cristobal running versus... taking a knee. Granted, that's a much different situation. That's a calm atmosphere. That's the end of the game. But like the amount of pressure that's on like a Dan Lanning when that's the loudest football environment I've ever been in. Like Autzen is consistently more loud, but that stadium hit a gear that I don't think I've.
Not even in Columbus, huh?
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it was muted by the time that we got down the field because Oregon had been in control the whole game.
Yeah, potentially.
It was crazy because it was so loud at the start. Like, I mean, they have 25,000 plus on Autzen.
Yeah.
But it was so starkly different than last time I was there for a lot of reasons, which was 2 years ago. It was so loud at the start of the game that when Oregon went 3-and-out after Washington did, but then Washington went down and scored, and Oregon got backed up in near their own end zone, and I think they got down to like a second and long, third and long, and it's just so loud. I was like, oh, this could get actually ugly.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, oh, I didn't expect this. It was ear piercing there. Nix is going up to every individual lineman and like shouting in their ear. And then it got quiet. By the time I was walking down to the field, Oregon had been in control for the whole third, or most of the third, whole fourth. And then we find our spots, and then in a heartbeat with 2 plays, the entire stadium is just alive again.
That was fun. That was fun football. I will say, because I was listening to a few podcasts this week where they were talking about Washington as like a national championship contender. And I'm having a hard time. I don't want to make an argument against, but still in my head, I still have the visions of what Pac-12 teams looked like against Georgia last year and what Georgia did. But also, I do realize that there might not be a Georgia like that this year, and just Washington's ability to like flip a game that quickly, it's intriguing because I do legitimately think Oregon can beat Washington. Oregon, I think, might still be a more complete football team than Washington, but Washington has one way that it can hurt you in ways that it's probably better at than anybody in the country, and that might play better.
Their thing, right? It's better than...
Right, and because, Oregon's gonna, if Oregon runs the table and they get rematched up and they beat Washington and they go to the playoff, they'll be playing some teams that, like, are going to be as good as they are at all those levels.
Yeah.
It was interesting because, again, if they had the rematch in Vegas, I don't think it would be asinine to pick Oregon in that game. But no. Washington's just an interesting football team. They're very dynamic.
Very dynamic. The thing that's been interesting for me this week about just kind of thinking about the fallout from that game is because it was just a 1, 2, 3 play deciding factor. Think about what we didn't talk about that we would have if the outcome was different. And one of those things is Washington's defense. They made some plays, and they had some big hits.
Just from the start, that little swing pass to James where he just got lit up.
That being said, they didn't overall have a great day, yardage-wise. The points, 36, doesn't look awful, but when you think about what Oregon left on the field, it could have been high 40s.
Yeah.
And then we're saying, well, this defense is holding Penix back. I'm kind of tired of the Dan Lanning stuff already. I don't really know how much I have to add to it, but it should be talked about probably.
Yeah, I think it just, like, it is what it is. If it worked, I hate the whole, like, if it worked, they'd be talking about him like he's a genius. Everyone goes for it on 4th downs now. They have, like, their sheets that, like, give them the probabilities and everything. I think in retrospect, I would have at very least kicked the field goal at the end of the first half. You just pick Penix off, which doesn't happen. Turn that into points.
Yeah.
Like, capitalize on that. But
that felt big.
Yeah, but ultimately, Lanning this week said he's not going to apologize for being aggressive, and that's his coaching style, and they're going to be aggressive to win games. I did see Ken Go tweet out today. He's like, or it's being aggressive to lose games. And so, yeah, I mean, it's at some point he's got to win a game like that, doing it that way, because thinking about in Oregon history, the sheets and the facts probably told Mark Helfrich to go for 2 every time in Nebraska. And now in retrospect, everyone's like, just kick 1 extra point attempt in that game, Mark. Right. And it's different. It's less egregious because it happened. Like, I still think you need to grade each one of those those scenarios individually, but you still end up looking at the sum, and the sum this week was 0.
I said I didn't have anything to add, and now I want to add stuff.
Add, baby.
So I think it's really important, like, separating the decisions to go for it and the plays and the result of the plays. I didn't think the decisions were egregious, and it's what I expect out of Lanning at this point. We can talk in a second about whether that's a good or bad thing, right? The one I felt was most defensible was the final one.
Yeah.
That ended up, directly costing the game because
Bucky Irvin was eating that game, and the offensive line was eating that game. Why not? I don't know.
Well, that's what I want to get to in a second. But another 25 yards for Penix. I know he was dealing with whatever. I don't think that made a difference. You put the game on ice if you convert there. Looking at the play calls, and especially watching the last one again because it was hard. We didn't really see it on the field that well. You have 3 4th and 3s or shorter, I believe. Was there a 4th and 4 in there, or am I making that up? I think it was 3 or shorter yards.
Either way.
None of them were an inches situation, but they didn't run on any of them. And that has been a thing where, that was their... When you look at the rest of the conference, there's a few teams, but Oregon's thing was they could also run that way. And they did that day. They had 200 rushing yards. And to not run and to run these little rollouts where they shrink the field for Nix and he's forced to make these quick decisions, I just didn't like the plays that much.
Or at the very least, Nix can be one of the most dynamic dual-threat quarterbacks in the country.
Yeah.
At least... I would have even taken a draw there or an option or, just something. But that was very much a rollout pass play. And they got all the defenders out on that side too. So it's not like he was going to turn that up and run on that side.
Well, there's no, with it's 4th and 3 and in some cases you're near the goal line, there's no longevity of the field. There's no levels in the ability for receivers to run and spread the field. It's all kind of collapsed in, and then you look at these replays where would Nix have gone? There's plays he missed. We were talking about it from the first quarter. He was underthrowing guys. They were catching at their feet and they left some yards out there, and it happened again with Troy. He missed Trayshawn in that one. My thing, I guess, with Lanning is I guess he's, at least you can say he's consistent, right?
Yeah. He knows who he is.
He goes in. It's a premeditated aggression. It's not a Staley situation with the Chargers where he's going to choose maybe this time I won't, but maybe this time I will. And so it's consistent. But the facts are the facts, and he's now, because of those calls not going his way, has blown the three of the probably the 5 biggest games in his Oregon tenure so far, you could say.
Man, that's wild.
I'm adding UCLA in that, and I'm adding Georgia in that. Am I missing one, you think?
UCLA.
Last year's UCLA game where the aggression paid off.
Oh, right. Correct.
They won 45-30 because the onside kick and some other moves.
Yeah.
Georgia was, an inevitable L.
Well, and a couple weeks ago they had that fake punt too.
Right.
But also that wasn't a very...
It's Colorado.
Yeah.
I don't really care about that anymore.
The stakes were different.
So the stats say that last year they were, and this year they've been one of the best 4th down teams. But again, I kind of was looking back and you look at the Oregon State game last year, you look at the Washington game last year, and he didn't go for it in his own territory in this game the way he did in those ones, and it directly cost him, and now he's got this 0-3 record versus them, and it doesn't give me a ton of optimism for an Oregon State game this year or a USC game when he's got another great quarterback on the other side.
Yeah, I will say, obviously from an Oregon perspective, the loss is disappointing, but from an overall storyline perspective, this second half of the Pac-12 season is going to be awesome.
Yeah. Because
Oregon State's still Oregon State just had the quietest top 25 win that you'll hear around these parts. Even against a Chip Kelly, they handled UCLA. They still have one loss. Of the teams that I've seen, I legitimately think Oregon State can hang with Washington and Oregon. I think they have the most inconsistent play at quarterback. But if they continue to keep trending DJ's put together some pretty good games as of late.
Yes.
And if they're just as physical on defense. They have just as good of an offensive line. They are finding out who their weapons are. Washington, Oregon State on November, whatever day in November. Yeah. That's going to be an awesome game too. And then that just sets up Oregon. There's going to be a lot of potential to this second half as long as as long as an Arizona or one of those games come up and get you. Granted, Arizona might not actually be that bad.
Right. What would you set the odds at of Oregon State beating either Washington or Oregon? Plus what? Just for shits and giggles.
Them beating Washington, I would put at plus 200.
You're doing it separately. I was looking for one number, but
no,
give
and
me
then
both.
and then them beating Oregon, I would put at like minus 115.
You think they'd be favored?
No. You know, sometimes like when you go on the books and like they're both at like minus 115, you're like yeah, I think that's a pick 'em.
Okay.
I think it's a pick 'em just because I do think that Washington can score points in a lot more of a hurry than Oregon State can.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just think they might be an overmatched team. They're granted that game is at Reser, which I didn't take into account. Plus 150.
So you're high on
Are we turning into I guess the lines here?
Well, here's another question for you.
We're gonna have like Reddit I-5 corridor podcast.
R dash.
Yeah, R dash.
Another question for you. I know it hasn't even been 2 seasons yet. What is Dan Lanning's biggest win in Oregon in your eyes?
The UCLA game last year.
Okay.
Is it?
I would say at Utah last year.
Oh yeah.
But I was.
But neither of those are like. I mean, that was. We talked about this a little bit last week, but I wonder what the opinion of Mario Cristobal in Oregon would be if he didn't win the big games, because that's all he did.
And there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and
I asked only because, and I'm not trying to start some like big thing here, big take, but I was going back through because I kind of had forgotten how on paper how egregious those decisions last year looked when they didn't work. Again, when they didn't work, right? And those, like, again, those are 3 of the biggest, whatever I said, 5-6 games of his career so far, and there's a through line to them. So it is very. I'll be monitoring it more going forward.
It's gotta be fascinating to be like Lanning's on the line. He's a very with it coach.
Yeah.
You can even just see that in the interviews he chooses to do, like the long form interviews he chooses to do.
Yeah.
So he's got to be reading all of this. Like he's got to be aware of. So the fact that there's something to him coming out and saying I'm not going to change who I am. That's probably what he believes, but there's like I'm kind of really going around in circles here to just say like he very much knows there's a lot of people watching like everything he's doing right now, and it's just fascinating to watch a second-year head coach who is pretty young in this profession kind of navigate all that.
He's 37 now. I think I said 35 on one of the other podcasts, but I think he was 35 when he got
hired. He was actually 35 before the Washington game, and then it aged him a couple of
right. He's so young, and someone made this point, and I can't remember who. I want to say it was a bigger TV person, maybe, or someone on a podcast.
Like bigger person, or like.
But they said
don't get us
that with the way the coaching carousel goes now, these coaches are getting their first head coaching chance at these huge programs. I mean, Kirby Smart's an excellent example. Like people forget that was his first head coaching job was Georgia, and so you add the learning process of having to be a first-time head coach with the expectations of one of those programs, and then you look at a guy like Lanning who's also so young. It's a learning process. And I think we're just seeing that play out.
That's a fascinating point because I'm sure
nobody wants to hear that when you lose, but it's interesting.
Right, and I'm sure if you were to talk to the best coaches of all time, like go talk to Nick Saban.
Yeah.
Nick Saban will tell you that he's a million times better head coach now at age 70. I mean, maybe not at age 70. At 65 he was.
Right.
Than his first year as a head coach. Don't expect that not to be true with Dan Lanning too. He's very young in this, even though he's a prodigy or whatever you want to, label a young head coach these days. But
how long did it take you to find your running voice? I think your answer to me, you haven't truly found it yet, but
yeah,
at least 10 years.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I might have been good at my age, but I'm a lot better now.
There you go.
Podcasting.
We're working there. The last thing I want to say about this game, just the environment. There's days where it definitely seems like the NFL can't rival college, and this was one of those days. And I think that I was really struck with coming back and then like having a day to digest is like the singular nature of like that Washington program right now. Like they just have, I don't know if mystique's the right word, but you're in this huge metro city, and it's a city that's defined by like it's right by the water, it's in the Pacific Northwest. You had this Heisman quarterback who it's not like he's doing something that no one's ever done, but he's doing it in a way that you don't always see people doing it now, like just unabashed gunslinging down the field. You have these really glaring strengths.
Yeah.
And then they have the sirens going, the purples everywhere. It was such a unique atmosphere, and I love that one-of-one nature of that program. It's like that's their thing.
Yeah.
I think that's super cool.
You know what I came away thinking too is Oregon better win the game next year because Washington has a lot of momentum, and everything that you just pointed at, if I was a recruit, that I would have committed on the spot after that game.
You were saying you wish you had gone to school there,
yeah. I mean, it's a very unique, and this isn't comparing it to Oregon. This is just talking about what Washington is.
Right.
It's a very attractive location. It's a cool school. It's a awesome stadium when it's like that, and like they have a lot of momentum going right now, and so much of Oregon's massive success when they were at their peak in the 2010s. Came while Washington was down. Same with when USC was down. And that's not to say that Oregon's success was smoke and mirrors or it was any less substantial than it was. But we're going into an era now where Oregon's going to be getting Washington's absolute best effort. And I think if the Ducks want to thrive in the Big Ten, they need to get to a point where they're doing that as well.
Well said. Yeah,
thank you.
It's it was really cool. I was just very struck by it. Like I said, being there 2 years ago, it was so different because it was just a crappy. It was a later game. I think it was like a 3:30 start. Weather was crappy. Not a lot of fans there. Washington wasn't a good team, and I mean it was a really special environment in that game. I kind of wish I had been almost more awake and present for it. Not that I didn't get to take a lot of it in, but again, I just think that's what makes college so cool, and it's just nothing like Eugene.
Can you give me, because I didn't partake, can you give me the review of the roast beef sandwich that you had from?
No, I had the turkey.
The turkey from Press Row.
Not high reviews. Like thick white bread that kind of it gets like doughy in your mouth and sticks to the roof of your mouth. You've had sandwiches like that. Yeah. You made it essentially the whole day without eating.
Unintentionally, because like I was like when we parked.
Sneaky move from you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to tighten. It just ended up being one of those days where I was thinking of getting something before we got into the stadium, and it was a little chaotic, and then the game was chaotic, and I didn't really think those boxed meals.
Oh, you didn't miss anything.
Yeah,
you had some popcorn though.
But like, right? I feel good today. I feel lighter. I feel. Got a little spring in my step.
When you got back at whatever time it was that night, did you indulge in anything, or was it just straight to bed?
I think So I was gonna stop at Taco Bell, and I didn't. I was like, I had the blinker on.
If only Lanning had that restraint, Restraint, that's huge.
That might be where we should end this. This is a little bit of a short podcast, but...
Well, do you going forward, you started to talk about it, it sound like you wouldn't be surprised if Oregon wins out, if they face Washington, even if they win again, but give me your kind of...
Well, so my thing right now is Oregon should win out, and Oregon should get to that Washington game, but should never happens in college football. I mean, that's the one thing, like, every year there's that one game that you don't expect, or something happens, or there's an injury, or whatever. We're halfway through the season, but we're just at the start of this gauntlet of the Pac-12 slate that the Ducks are going to go through. So, I think that they're going to win out. I think getting Oregon State at home is the advantage that the Ducks need to win that game, because I think they are very equal teams. But we'll see. I mean, like, even this week, like, they're playing a Washington State team that doesn't have a whole lot of momentum right now, but 2 weeks ago they were undefeated, and we were talking about their quarterback is one of the best in the country. It's amazing how quickly things can change in this conference. And the same, if the Ducks lose again this week, I mean, it's not like they're out of the conference rates per se, but all of the hype that we've had for the last 3 weeks, that's just kind of gone, and it's crazy how quickly that can turn.
Yeah. Is there a team on that? Because it's a little bit of a gauntlet, like, that you think could be the team to throw the wrench in.
I don't know if it's the team that throws. I mean, let me rephrase this. I'm going to pick at Utah.
Yeah, that's been the common one.
Because even if they don't have their quarterback thing figured out by then, even if it's not working,
I don't think they will. It's 2 weeks away.
That's one of the toughest places to play. Utah, I mean, even though Oregon State, like I thought Oregon State handled them awfully well, but I think it's a different ball game with them when you're playing at home and you got the crowd going on offense and
especially with backup quarterbacks.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying I think Oregon's going to win that game, but I do think that or do they go to Arizona, right?
No, they don't.
Do they go to ASU? No, they have
I believe it's ASU at home.
I'm not worried about that, but
oh, you're not.
No. I'd be more worried.
Not a Dillingham revenge game.
Dude, Dillingham's been.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing.
Dude, have you watched his interviews?
A few of them.
They are brewing some strong coffee down in that Arizona State.
Kind of maybe what you'd expect with a 33-year-old head coach.
How about you though?
Yeah, again, I think the Utah one was really popular and still is. I just, without Rising, I don't know how intimidated I would be of that team, even on the road. And I mean, USC looked really rough.
You know that's gonna be the one that gets the Ducks. It's gonna be by that point we're gonna be so convinced that Oregon's gonna roll USC. We're gonna be like USC has no defense. Yeah, they can score points. Blah 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 blah. And then it's going to end up being like a 65-58 shootout. And like,
yeah, we're like 3 weeks from that. It's not that far away.
Yeah.
That should be a fun one. I think it's probably Oregon State to answer your question.
Yeah, I agree.
The thing about that loss too, and what should happen in college, talking about the Washington loss, is it wasn't a fluky loss. It was a close, hard-earned win by Washington, whatever you want to say. Most years, these teams are derailed because of weird losses. Oregon and
Arizona State 2019.
There you go. Right, we can list them all. And this is not just an Oregon thing. This is an every team thing. Mm-hmm. Like, who's the fluky one? Like, and that's why I'm wondering. So again, I would love for them to win out because I would love to see that rematch, and I think that'd be a phenomenal game, and it would be so cool to see it. Not only another matchup between those teams, but one that has potentially the Heisman riding on it, although at that point it'd probably be sewn up. But more so a Pac-12 title and a potential playoff ticket on the line.
I've realized something over the last week.
Yeah.
I think maybe it was on this podcast or maybe it was just in conversations between the two of us where I was like, I'm not so sold on Wembanyama as everybody else.
Sold.
I'm sold. just take my money. He's the dunk he had where it was just like the side dunk.
Was that
from like almost like the free throw line, and it was over the dude, and the one other dude was just like looking like, what the hell just happened?
That happened the night before the Washington game.
Yeah.
And so I was like trying to pull up highlights the whole day, and like my connection wasn't good enough, so I didn't get to see it all. But yeah, I mean he's the truth. Although Scoot looks great too, and hopefully we can talk Blazers soon.
Yeah, so we have Blazers season opener is next week, I believe. Yeah. So we'll
just a boatload of content coming for that.
Yeah. It'll be NBA week on the I-5 corridor. Anything else before we take off here, Shane?
No, I guess I'm not surprised, but I've been interested to see how in on the Beavers you are. And I don't think it's wrong, but all of a sudden it seems like you've done a little bit of a 180 on them.
What do you mean 180?
Not that you were super down on them per se, but I was surprised how bullish you are that they could even beat a Washington or Oregon.
Right. I think when I saw them play Utah,
you came back talking about them like quite a bit.
Yeah, when I saw them play Utah, I saw everything that I needed to see other than elite quarterback play. And DJ played good that game too. But like after that one, you could kind of tell Jonathan had like it kind of felt like they could sense that like DJ was kind of figuring some things out, and Smith was talking then too about like it's not as plug and play as everyone thinks it is. Like when you bring a quarterback in, especially when they've had multiple years in a different system.
We probably overdid that. Just talking between ourselves.
Absolutely. So yeah, he's gonna have, just as we were talking about like first year young head coaches, like a new quarterback's gonna have some struggles during the season, but he's been efficient lately. His yards per attempt has been higher. I think he's finding some chemistry, especially with like Bolden. I don't think they're as good as Oregon or Washington, but if I'm Oregon or Washington, I don't want to play them.
If I was doing one of those talk shows where you have to like kind of lead everything in with these big brash headlines, I would say Oregon State, the new Utah question mark?
Ooh, I like that. And we will discuss that after the break. Thanks for listening. It's actually the end of the podcast if you didn't get it. I got it.